My father used us as his punching bags every day until we escaped. I was only 6 when I first felt the weight of fear settle into my bones. My father wasn't just strict. He was a storm, a tempest of anger that tore through our home without warning. Mom would tremble at the mere sound of his boots hitting the wooden floor, and I learned quickly that any noise, any misstep, could spark a rage that would land on me as punishment. Our house looked rich on the outside. Marble floors, expensive furniture, golden fixtures, the kind of place people would envy. But inside, it was a prison. The kind of place where love and laughter had been evicted years before. Dad was a millionaire, but his money meant nothing compared to his cruelty. He ran his empire with the same violence he ruled over us. If he wanted you to work, you worked, without question, without rest, without complaint. For me, that meant the ice rink he owned. I hated it from the start. The freezing, artificial cold that stung my skin, the hours spent scrubbing and maintaining it, and the endless, soul-draining skating drills he forced me to do, even when I was small. My father would watch with a hawk's eye, his face twisted in scorn if I faltered, his hand ready to strike. Mom tried to shield me, tried to reason with him, but she was no match for the fury he carried like a weapon. I would sometimes find her hiding in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she cleaned, whispering apologies I couldn't understand. She was brave, but only up to a point. I saw the bruises she bore on more than one occasion, and I knew that the same violence was meant for me, too. I remember one winter evening that changed everything. The rink had frozen over for another grueling session, and my father was already pacing angrily. I had tripped on a patch of ice, nothing serious, but to him, it was the ultimate betrayal. His face contorted, and before I could react, he kicked me. Full force, a strike that sent me sprawling across the cold floor. Pain exploded through my body, more than just physical. It was humiliation, terror, and hopelessness all wrapped into one unbearable moment. I crawled back to my room that night, tears freezing on my cheeks, and for the first time, I knew that I couldn't survive living like this forever. Mom and I whispered about it quietly, knowing he would be listening if we weren't careful. "We can't stay here," she said one night, her voice shaking but firm. He's going to kill us, or worse. We have to leave." My heart pounded. Leaving meant nothing familiar, nothing safe. It meant stepping into the unknown with nothing but the clothes on our backs. But every day spent under his roof felt like a slow death. We had no choice. That night, we packed what little we could, just the essentials, a few blankets, some clothes, and waited until the house fell silent. Dad had gone out, probably angry at some business failure, or perhaps just needing to blow off steam elsewhere. Mom took my hand, and together, we crept out the back door into the dark, cold night. The world outside seemed enormous, intimidating, but it was also free. We walked until the first light of dawn, heading for the city where my grandfather lived. The city of my grandfather felt like a different world. The streets were narrower, dirtier, and far less glamorous than the mansion we had left behind, but for the first time in my life, I felt safe. My grandfather was a quiet man, humble and kind, living in a modest apartment that smelled faintly of old books and bread. When he saw us standing in the doorway, shivering from the cold and exhaustion, he didn't ask a single question about why we had left. He just pulled us inside and wrapped us in blankets, offering tea and warm bread, as if he had been expecting us all along. We were poor here, impossibly so. My father's money had been a curse. Here, we had nothing, but we were alive. Mom found a small cleaning job in a nearby bakery, and she worked from sunrise to sunset, her hands raw from scrubbing and kneading dough. I wanted to help too, but I was just 12, too young for anything serious. Still, I couldn't sit idly by. I wandered the streets, asking shopkeepers if they needed odd jobs done, running errands, carrying packages, shoveling snow. Some laughed at the idea of a skinny boy wanting to work, but others took pity and gave me small jobs that barely paid for a loaf of bread or a coat in winter. School was another challenge. I had been pulled out for years, my education sacrificed to my father's demands and abuse. I walked into the classroom, trembling under the gaze of older kids, some cruel, some curious. I was behind in everything, math, reading, even writing, but I threw myself into it. I studied late into the night, using borrowed books and scraps of paper. I knew that the only way to survive, the only way to make life safe for Mom and me, was to excel. Failure was a luxury we couldn't afford. At first, I struggled. Teachers didn't believe in me. Classmates teased me relentlessly, and I felt the sting of shame that came from knowing I had been denied a proper childhood. But I refused to give up. I remembered every kick, every insult, every moment of fear from my father's mansion, and let it fuel me. Every hour I spent studying, every job I took to earn money, was a tiny act of rebellion, a way of saying, I will survive. I will succeed. I will protect my family. It wasn't easy. We scraped by, often eating meager meals and wearing secondhand clothes that smelled faintly of other people's lives. But there was dignity in our struggle. I watched Mom's eyes light up when we had a little extra at the end of the month. I saw hope grow in the cracks of our poverty. And I promised myself, every night as I lay awake listening to the distant hum of the city, that one day I would repay the world for its kindness, and one day I would make a life where my family could finally be free. And so, I worked harder than anyone else. By the age of 14, I had my first real job at a small grocery store, delivering supplies and stocking shelves. The owner, a gruff man named Mr. Petrov, recognized my determination and grit. He started giving me more responsibilities, and slowly, the money I earned began to grow. With it, we bought small comforts, better food, proper winter coats, a few toys for the rare moments when Mom could allow herself to smile without fear. It was a humble life, but it was ours. And for the first time, I dared to dream. By the time I turned 16, I had become the backbone of our little family. Mom still worked tirelessly at the bakery, her hands scarred and her back aching, but she smiled more often now. I had taken on multiple jobs, delivering groceries, assisting in a small printing shop, even tutoring younger kids in math and reading. Every penny I earned went to keeping us afloat, sometimes even buying a little extra so Mom could rest. I had learned to thrive in hardship, to turn every challenge into fuel for my determination. School became my sanctuary. I devoured every book I could get my hands on, losing myself in knowledge like it was armor against the cruelty of my past. I stayed after classes, asking teachers for extra work, memorizing textbooks in corners of the library while other kids played outside. It wasn't easy. My fingers were raw from labor, my muscles sore, and often I was so exhausted that I could barely keep my eyes open. Yet I refused to give in. Each success, each small achievement, was a tiny revenge on the father who had tried to break me. One winter evening, I came home with my first real paycheck. I had saved for weeks, and that night, I walked Mom to a small furniture store and bought her a new set of chairs for the apartment. She cried when she saw them, wrapping me in a tight embrace. "You've given me life again," she whispered. That moment, I realized how much power there was in providing, in protecting, in rising above the abuse we had endured. But life had more trials. My father, ever the shadow in my life, had not disappeared completely. Rumors reached us from the city, stories of his cruel business dealings, lawsuits, and the growing resentment of people he had wronged. I felt a strange mixture of fear and satisfaction. Fear because his violence had left scars that might never heal. Satisfaction because, finally, the universe seemed to be noticing his recklessness. Despite everything, I had begun to carve out a life for myself. By 18, I earned enough to rent a small apartment for Mom and me, a place we could call truly ours. It wasn't the mansion we had fled, but it was warmth and safety, things I had learned to value far more than gold or marble floors. I continued to excel in school, and soon, my hard work paid off. A scholarship offer from a respected university. My dreams of success were no longer distant illusions. They were within reach. One night, I sat at the kitchen table, Mom asleep nearby, and allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. I remembered the icy floors of my father's rink, the fear in my mother's eyes, the bruises I had tried to hide. And I smiled quietly to myself. I had survived. Not only survived, I had built. Every day of labor, every sleepless night, every hardship endured had brought us here. And yet, in the back of my mind, a flicker of something else burned: justice. My father's cruelty would not go unchallenged forever. University life was a revelation. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who judged me not by my past, but by my effort, intelligence, and character. I threw myself into every subject: business, economics, law, learning not just for grades, but as preparation for the life I intended to build. Late nights were spent studying in the dim glow of my desk lamp, while weekends were for extra jobs, tutoring, or freelance work that helped keep mom comfortable. Every success was a small victory over the years of abuse and deprivation we had endured. I made friends, yes, but I was cautious. My past had taught me that trust was fragile. Still, there were a few I confided in, people who saw my ambition and grit and encouraged me. One of them, a young man named Leo, became my closest ally. He came from a modest background as well, and together we shared late-night meals, crammed for exams, and dreamed about building futures where our families would never have to fear hunger or violence again. Leo was the brother I had never had, and I clung to that bond like a lifeline. By my second year, I had saved enough to start investing in small ventures, learning the ins and outs of business while still a student. Every deal I struck, every opportunity one seized, was a step toward reclaiming what had been stolen from us. I would not let my father's shadow define me anymore. I wanted more than survival. I wanted triumph. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. It was official, stamped with the seal of the authorities. My father had been arrested. The letter didn't give details, only stating that charges of fraud, assault, and numerous business crimes had led to his imprisonment. I felt a strange cocktail of emotions: relief, satisfaction, disbelief. The man who had dominated our lives with fear, the man whose hands had caused so much pain, was finally powerless. And yet, I couldn't feel joy entirely. That anger, the bitterness of my childhood, still lingered, sharp and raw. I didn't attend his trial. I didn't need to. Justice had found him. What mattered was the life I was building for mom and myself. I threw myself even harder into work, knowing that every decision I made would secure our future. By the time I graduated, I had already purchased a modest house. It wasn't a palace, but it was ours, safe, warm, and filled with sunlight instead of fear. Mom wept the day we moved in, hugging me so tightly I thought she might never let go. "You've given me life again," she whispered. And I realized with quiet pride that I had fulfilled the promise I had made to myself all those years ago in the dark of my father's house. We would survive, and we would thrive. I bought a car next, a small, reliable vehicle that symbolized freedom and independence. Every drive, every errand, every trip to see relatives or friends reminded me that we were no longer prisoners of fear. And yet, despite all the progress, I never forgot the lessons of hardship. I never forgot the weight of a father's cruelty. Those memories became tools sharpening my resolve, driving me to succeed where he had failed, to build a legacy not of wealth alone, but of love, care, and resilience. Success, however, did not erase the scars of the past. The memories of my father's tyranny sometimes surfaced in the quiet moments, when I was alone in the house, when mom had gone to sleep, or when the weight of responsibility felt heaviest. But instead of letting them crush me, I used them as fuel. Every challenge I faced in business or in life became an echo of the ice rink, of the cold fear and the crushing blows I had endured. I reminded myself, if I could survive that, I could survive anything. By the age of 22, I had turned a small online venture into a thriving business. What had started as tutoring and odd jobs became investments, partnerships, and finally a full-fledged company providing services to clients across the city. I hired employees carefully, treating them with respect and fairness, the very opposite of how my father had run his empire. I became known for integrity, reliability, and an unyielding work ethic. Every day, my success was a subtle revenge, a silent statement to the man who had once tried to destroy me. I am more than your cruelty. Mom watched me grow into a man she barely recognized. Her tears often came not from sadness, but from pride. I had become a pillar, the kind of person she had dreamed of for her children. And though we were still cautious, still wary of the world, our lives had transformed into something stable and secure. We were no longer hiding, no longer running, no longer subject to terror. For the first time, peace seemed attainable. And yet, Life had one more test waiting. One day, a news report flashed across the television in the living room. My father's name appeared, alongside details of a trial that had concluded months before. He had been convicted of multiple crimes, including financial fraud, assault, and reckless endangerment. The report described his sentencing, a lengthy prison term with no possibility of early release. The weight of satisfaction was almost physical. I felt vindicated, though I did not celebrate loudly. Instead, I allowed myself a quiet smile, the kind that comes from knowing justice had been served. There were moments when anger still bubbled beneath the surface, anger at the years lost, at the childhood stolen, at the countless nights Mom and I had spent in fear. But I had learned something crucial. Vengeance is most powerful when it is lived through success. By building a life of stability, prosperity, and love, I had already achieved the ultimate revenge. My father's cruelty could no longer touch us. His reign of terror had ended, not with my hands, but with the law and the life I had created in spite of him. I remember visiting the prison once, curious but cautious. I didn't seek confrontation. I didn't need to. I walked through the gates and saw him, older, diminished, stripped of power. The man who had once ruled my life through fear was now a mere shadow, powerless and confined. I looked him in the eye for a brief moment, and I saw no fear, no recognition of the pain he had caused. I saw only the consequences of his choices. And for the first time, I felt completely free. Even with my father behind bars, life didn't slow down. I poured my energy into expanding the business, hiring more employees, and investing in opportunities that could secure our future. I was careful, meticulous, and relentless. Every decision was informed by lessons learned from the past. Never trust blindly, always prepare for the worst, and never allow fear to dictate your choices. Mom, who had endured so much, began to live with a freedom she hadn't known in decades. I saw her laughter more often now, heard it echo through our home, and it filled a void I didn't know could ever be healed. But the real victory was personal. I wasn't just building wealth, I was building identity. I was no longer the scared boy on the ice, flinching at every step. I was a man who had faced fear and won, not through violence, but through perseverance, intelligence, and compassion. Friends and colleagues saw me as confident, capable, and trustworthy. Students I tutored still occasionally reached out, sharing success stories of their own, and I realized that the pain of my childhood had taught me empathy and understanding, qualities that now guided my leadership. One evening, sitting in my office overlooking the city, I thought about the path that had brought me here. The frostbitten rink, the slaps, the humiliations, they all seemed distant now, like memories from someone else's life. And yet, they were the reason I had achieved everything. The fear I had endured had forced me to grow, to adapt, to become relentless. I had transformed the scars of my youth into the fuel for my future. Then came an unexpected challenge. A former business associate of my father attempted to undermine one of my ventures, trying to leverage his connections to make me fail. The memory of my father's manipulations flashed sharply in my mind. I didn't react in anger. I didn't panic. Instead, I used strategy, patience, and calculated risk. Within months, not only had I neutralized the threat, but I had turned it into an advantage, securing new partnerships and clients. I realized that life would always test me, but unlike before, I had the tools to navigate it successfully. Mom noticed the change in me. "You're not just surviving," she said quietly one night as we shared tea in the kitchen. "You're thriving. You've taken everything that could have broken us and made it stronger." Her words touched me deeply. I had spent so long chasing safety, chasing security, that I sometimes forgot the broader picture. That life could be beautiful, that joy could exist without fear, that love and laughter could fill our days. By now, our home was fully furnished, warm, and welcoming. Neighbors who had once looked at us with pity now treated us with respect. Mom no longer worried about threats or hunger, and I had begun to think about long-term dreams, investments, future expansions, perhaps even a family of my own one day. The boy who had been kicked across an ice rink and left in terror had become a man capable of creating life, stability, and hope. Despite all the progress, there were moments when the past came knocking unexpectedly. Old friends from my childhood occasionally reached out, some seeking help, others seeking vengeance for perceived slights connected to my father's legacy. At first, I was wary, unsure how to navigate these encounters. But over time, I learned to handle them with wisdom rather than fear. I became a man who could face the ghosts of the past without flinching, turning potential threats into opportunities or neutralizing them with calm precision. One particularly striking moment came when I learned that my father had attempted to manipulate family members from prison, trying to sow discord between Mom and me. Letters and calls intercepted by the authorities revealed his twisted schemes. He wanted us to fail, to squabble, and to relive the terror of our earlier lives. I held the letters in my hands, my chest tight with anger, and for the first time, I considered revenge. Not physical, not cruel, just the satisfaction of knowing we had already outgrown him. I did nothing. Instead, I continued to build, continued to thrive, and continued to shield Mom from his influence. That silence, that steadfastness, became the ultimate victory. Life also began to bring unexpected joys. I found friendships and mentorships in places I had never imagined, business partners who respected me, students who admired my journey, even neighbors who shared simple moments of laughter and warmth. Every connection was a reminder that the world was not entirely cruel, that kindness existed alongside hardship, and that I could shape my own narrative free from the shadow of my father. By the time I was 25, I had expanded our home, acquired a reliable car, and invested in education and opportunities for others. I had become a pillar in the community, someone people looked to for guidance, support, and inspiration. My father's name was whispered occasionally in fear or contempt, but it held no power over me. I had transformed pain into purpose, fear into resilience, and hatred into wisdom. Then came the most poignant moment of all, a quiet evening when Mom and I sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the city. I handed her a small box, something I had saved for months. Inside was a modest pendant, a symbol of our journey and survival. Her eyes filled with tears as she held it close, and she whispered, "You've given me everything I could have ever wanted. You've made our lives beautiful." And in that instant, I realized that success wasn't measured by wealth or power, but by the love, safety, and stability we had created together. Looking back, the path from the ice rink to this moment had been brutal, filled with fear, pain, and uncertainty. But every kick, every insult, every sleepless night had forged the man I had become. I was no longer a victim, no longer a scared boy hiding from his father. I was a survivor, a provider, a protector, and most importantly, a man who had reclaimed his life, piece by piece, with dignity and courage. As the years went by, I began to think beyond survival and comfort. I wanted to create a legacy, something that would outlast me and honor the sacrifices Mom and I had made. I invested in education programs for children from disadvantaged backgrounds, teaching them the values I had learned through hardship, resilience, determination, and the courage to rise above circumstances. I wanted them to know that poverty, fear, or cruelty didn't define who they could become. Each child I helped reminded me of the scared boy I once was, and every success felt like a quiet victory over the man who had tried to destroy me. One day, while reviewing some old family documents, I found pictures of my father before his descent into cruelty. He looked young, ambitious, and hopeful, a mirror of what I could have been under different circumstances. The realization hit me hard. It wasn't the money that had corrupted him, but the choices he had made. That understanding didn't soften my anger, but it gave me clarity. I decided that my life would not follow the same path. I would use wealth and power not to dominate, but to uplift, not to instill fear, but to inspire. Business continued to grow, and with it, our stability. I bought Mom a small garden behind the house where she could grow vegetables, herbs, and flowers, something she had always dreamed of. On weekends, we would sit there together, tending to plants, sharing stories, and laughing freely. I had never imagined that moments like these could exist for us, but they were sweeter precisely because we had endured so much. Freedom, it turned out, was not just escaping the past. It was cultivating joy in the present. Then, unexpectedly, an old family acquaintance from my father's world contacted me. He had been a silent observer of my father's downfall, a man who had feared the wrath of a tyrant but respected the determination of the son who had survived. He offered insight into opportunities that could expand my business internationally. I hesitated at first, wary of entanglements with the world my father had corrupted, but I realized that prudence and caution were different from fear. I accepted, carefully evaluating every risk, and soon our business reached new heights. Despite the growing success, I never allowed myself to forget the lessons of hardship. I kept a modest lifestyle, donated quietly, and ensured Mom never lifted a finger more than necessary. Every investment, every new venture was guided by the principles of fairness, integrity, and protection of those I loved. In my heart, I knew that real power was not in control or wealth, but in the ability to nurture, protect, and inspire others. And so, the life I had once dreamed of, the life of safety, dignity, and love, had become a reality. The shadow of my father still lingered in stories and whispers, but it could no longer touch me. I had built something enduring, a family restored, a home secured, a life defined by resilience rather than fear. Years passed, and I began to see the full measure of how far we had come. Mom was healthy, happy, and surrounded by friends she had made in the city. I had established a comfortable routine, balancing work, mentorship, and family life. Yet, life wasn't just about comfort. It was about remembering the past to guide the future. I often visited schools, sharing my story with young people who felt trapped by circumstance, hoping they would understand that resilience, hard work, and determination could transform even the most painful beginnings. Then came a moment that tested my strength in a different way. My father, nearing the end of his prison term, attempted to reach out to me. Letters arrived, filled with apologies, justifications, and vague promises of reconciliation. For a fleeting moment, doubt crept in. Could I forgive him? Could I allow his presence, even at a distance, into my life? But the boy who had once cowered on the ice rink understood the answer. Forgiveness was not weakness. It was not forgetting, but allowing myself to move fully into the life I had created. I wrote back once, simply stating that our lives were separate, that the past was a lesson, and that we were no longer bound by his tyranny. Silence followed, and I felt relief like never before. Around this time, I bought a new home for Mom and me, a house with sunlight in every room, a garden in the back, and space enough for friends and family to gather. It wasn't opulent, but it symbolized everything we had fought for: safety, freedom, and love. I purchased a reliable car as well, a practical reminder that independence was one of life's greatest gifts. Each day, I woke knowing we were no longer prisoners, no longer defined by fear, and no longer constrained by someone else's cruelty. The final piece of closure came when I received a court update. My father, after years behind bars, had been fully sentenced for all his crimes. The judge's words were firm. The law would protect the vulnerable, punish the guilty, and ensure that justice prevailed. I didn't feel triumph in the sense of gloating. Instead, I felt peace. The man who had once controlled my life through fear now had no power over me, no ability to harm us again. The scales had balanced, not by revenge, but by endurance, integrity, and a life I had built from nothing. Mom and I celebrated quietly that evening, drinking tea in the glow of our kitchen lights. I watched her smile, her face free from the shadows of the past, and I realized that real success was not measured by money or property. It was measured by the lives we touched, the love we nurtured, and the freedom we created. We had survived the storm, and now we live in the calm that comes from resilience, courage, and determination. By now, our lives had transformed completely. The boy who had once been kicked across the icy floor of a cruel father's mansion had grown into a man capable of creating safety, comfort, and happiness, not just for himself, but for the person who had endured alongside him, Mom. Our home was warm, filled with light and laughter, a stark contrast to the cold, oppressive halls I had fled so many years ago. Every corner, every piece of furniture, every flower in the garden symbolized survival, triumph, and the power of determination. I continued to expand the business, but my focus shifted from mere profit to impact. I established scholarships, invested in local communities, and created programs to teach young people the lessons I had learned: resilience, focus, and the understanding that even the harshest circumstances can be overcome. I wanted to ensure that no child would feel trapped by fear or poverty as I had. Every story of success I witnessed, every life improved, became a quiet, lasting revenge against the cruelty that had once tried to break me. Mom thrived alongside me. She took up painting again, filling our walls with her art, something she had abandoned during the years of fear and toil. We traveled, sometimes simply to visit distant relatives, other times just to breathe fresh air in forests and mountains. We laughed openly now, without fear of reprisal, without the constant shadow of abuse. Her happiness became my greatest reward, the true measure of everything I had fought to achieve. And then, there were moments of reflection, moments when I thought of my father. I no longer felt anger as strongly as I once had. His prison sentence and our rebuilt lives had done their work. The fear, the cruelty, the abuse, they existed only as memories, shadows of a past that had shaped me, but no longer controlled me. I understood, finally, that true power lies not in domination or intimidation, but in building, protecting, and nurturing. My father had failed because he had sought power through fear. I had succeeded because I had chosen strength through resilience. One quiet evening, as Mom and I sat in the garden watching the sunset, I felt a profound sense of peace. The world was still imperfect, still filled with challenges, but we had conquered the ones that had once defined us. I had kept the promise I made in that dark night long ago, to survive, to protect, and to thrive. We had left behind the ice, the fear, the cruelty, and had built a life rich not only in comfort but in love, joy, and freedom. And in that calm, I realized the ultimate truth. Revenge is fleeting, but triumph is eternal. Every step I had taken from that first cold night out the back door to this moment had been a journey not of hatred, but of transformation. The scars remained, yes, but they were no longer chains. They were reminders of strength, resilience, and the incredible power of surviving against all odds and building a life worth living. Our story, born from fear and cruelty, had become one of hope, triumph, and enduring love.